All right, and we're back for another episode of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here from Inside Sports Fantasy Football, the Lakers Fast Break, Pop Culture Cosmos, and Game Source. We truly appreciate everyone out there listening to all of our shows. If you get a chance, please give us that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you can. It really, truly helps us out. And of course, if you get a chance as well on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel, you can check out our great stuff, including our 200th episode of the Pop Culture Cosmos, which you can hear this week on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel. It's already out, so it's already ready for you. Plus, also, we've got some great interviews for the Lakers Fast Break, the Super BS Gamescast, and so much more right there on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel. Or you can hear more great episodes coming down the line for Inside Sports Fantasy Football. We were just waiting for things to start kicking off, and, well, we've had some news recently. Not too much news, but it was a big one, and it came down yesterday as Cam Newton. We've all been wondering where he was going to sign. We've all been wondering if he was going to be healthy enough to sign. Well, both those questions were answered when New England yesterday signed him to a 1-year deal worth up to around $7 million if he hits all the incentives. And here today to talk about that and so much more. Well, actually, here today to talk about that, because there's really not much, again, going on because there's so much fear and trepidation going on because of the coronavirus. And if there is going to be an NFL season, is a good man indeed. You got to follow what he's doing today at Chris L Sports on Twitter. He's got his podcast as well with his son. You got to check out as well. But it is a good man indeed from Inside Sports. It is Chris Lardieri. And Chris, I'm telling you, my friend, it's good to have you back, but I'm so glad I didn't get you involved in the fantasy league that Jason Dutch and I are involved in, and Big Haas from Voice from the Underground, because that is a keeper league that was 30 rounds, I think, 30 some odd rounds, and it took over 2 weeks to finally finish.
Wow. Well, Gerald, thank you. It's great to be back. Thanks for the kind words. That sounds exhausting just coming out of your mouth. So I can only imagine what it was really like.
It was. My suggestion, there's some great guys in the group. It's part of the Jock and Nerd podcast group that's out there. Some great guys and great people part of it. But my advice, if you're going to do a keeper league, I've done them before in the past, but cut it down to 15 players. 15 players. You leave a lot more open for some maneuvering down the road. Just throwing it out there. If you got a keeper league out there and you go ahead, and especially if you're doing it online and people are all around the country trying to go ahead and make picks, and you're going to be like us where it's extending that much, do yourself a favor, shorten up those rosters, because when you're getting down to it and you're picking players who probably won't even make their teams or any teams in the NFL, it really doesn't make sense to keep picking at that point in time.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's in a normal year. Think about now where we might not even have training camps start on time. We don't know who's in shape, who's not. There's so many questions on top of what a typical fantasy year would present.
Exactly. There's so many different variables right now. And this is something you and I, next time we go on air, we're going to talk about extensively is, the prospects of the season going forward with the coronavirus out there, because as everyone knows, and I'm sure you watch the news, I'm sure you hear the news, I'm sure you see the news and read the news. The coronavirus in virtually every state in the United States is going up. It's trending up, and it's not trending in a good direction. And it's something that is going to be of great concern to all the sports leagues. Major League Baseball, which is trying to start up at the end of July. The NBA, which is trying to do the same thing. Even in the bubble, there is great concern in Orlando for that. The NHL, which is rumored to be coming here to Vegas, which I'm very excited about. That is even with the number of players that tested positive last week, and as far as testing is concerned, that could be an issue as far as if that's actually going to come to fruition, a league here centered in Las Vegas. So just right now, a lot of questions, and the NFL was such a larger amount of players involved, because you're over 50 men to a team. Just so many variables to concern when it considers how you're going to combat this virus and how you're going to go ahead and pull off an NFL schedule.
Absolutely. And when you figure too, with if it is 53 guys in a locker room, just think how much quicker that can spread. What do you do then if one team loses 10 guys on a Saturday before the game? How do you account for that? There's really no bubble in the NFL, whereas in the NBA, you've got smaller rosters, and Silver's trying to do as much as possible to contain it all at this compound down in Orlando. A lot remains to be seen. I mean, I heard some teams are talking about could they potentially have fans in the stands at 15 to 20,000 when you're going to have other states like here in California, potentially in Nevada where you live, in Vegas, or the New Jersey teams, or even some of the ones in Florida that can't field fans. How are they going to handle that? So there's so much going on. I think we were on a course where everyone thought, all right, this is letting up some. We could sneak in the MLB games, NBA in a compound. Same with the NHL, but the NFL has skated by, but part of me feels like they've got the most question marks at this point. They can't even get off the ground and lay out a plan of attack.
And if they are going to go ahead and do it right now, unless it gets pushed back, like college football has been talking about doing it in the spring, they might need to push it back to the spring of 2021 as well. This is something that I think they need to seriously think about going forward. You're right. With Goodell and the NFL pushing ahead, full steam ahead is something I wouldn't be surprised at. But as we're seeing right now with the NBA, I mean, they're having training camps. They're not even in Orlando yet, and they're already closing down centers where they're based at. For some of the teams like Denver and Brooklyn and whatnot, closing those down because of the fact that these outbreaks, small as they are beginning to happen.
Absolutely, and the trend is going up that way. It's not like these are some rogue cases that are going on. It's going throughout the country. It's not isolated to certain areas like the New York tri-state area. We're seeing these pockets. And I think the scariest thing is the asymptomatic cases where you have no signs of it whatsoever, but you can still pass it. So, just as a society as a whole, you've got to be concerned. But I try not to be cynical, but if any of these leagues can complete even a shortened season, I'd be happy, but I'd also be amazed at this point in time.
You and I both, my friend, but the next time we're on, we're going to discuss that in greater detail. But right now on the front page for fans out there of the NFL and for fantasy football fans as well, Cam Newton signed over the weekend with New England Patriots on a one-year deal. My first question to you is, if New England's looking at him, which you and I don't say we guessed it or we called it, but we kind of surmised that would probably be a decent landing spot for Cam Newton. I mean, obviously it looks like Cam Newton has passed his physicals and should be somewhat ready to go if and when we do get a season started.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, the Patriots or the Jaguars made the most sense. I think Patriots more, but you just never know. The X factor is Belichick. What is he going to do? Yet again, in his dark side of the force way, he waited it out perfectly, snuck it in on the same day the Patriots got slapped with a fine and returning the third-round draft pick for their quote-unquote film crew illegally taping a Bengals-Browns game this past year. But, by the way, we're signing Cam Newton on a Sunday evening Eastern time. And then, too, they got him on the cheap. I know the number thrown around was something like $7.5 million, but that includes incentives. I mean, the salary cap hit is minuscule. If anything, I think there's a lot of upside. And you say, if he stays healthy. Well, if any quarterback at his age stays healthy, you're happy. The thing with him is the coming off of major surgeries, first the shoulder, then the foot. I guess they think he's healed enough, but at the end of the day, I'll take a maybe not 100% Cam Newton MVP physical-wise over a Jared Stidham. What do you think?
I would. I mean, you and I were voicing about this, the last time we broached the subject of Cam Newton is the fact that we thought he was an NFL MVP, for goodness sakes. He has a skill even at 31, and he's just getting started. As you know, NFL quarterbacks are now going 40 years and beyond. He definitely has a lot more left in the tank if he can just get healthy enough. I think that with the potential layoff or the potential delay in the NFL season, that might be appearing on the horizon. And I'm not saying anything I know or anything I see. I'm just reading the tea leaves, as they say, as best I can. I think that he should have plenty of time to be effective enough not only to learn Belichick's system, but also to go ahead and be healthy enough to be, at least at the beginning of the season or close to it, be productive enough to go ahead and easily get that starter position. I mean, there's no way he should be put behind Jared Stidham if he's at all healthy.
Completely agree. And I think too, even if Cam is not as fleet of foot as he once was during his peak of his late 20s, the guy is incredibly more mobile than Tom Brady was the past few years. So I think for McDaniels and Belichick, you have that aspect too. Not that he's going to run, but that he can move around. Maybe you roll him out some. Maybe if you need him to run, he can. Brady was just basically it reminded me of Eli Manning back there. It was almost like a statue throwing. You weren't going to get anything out of him. So I think too that adds another aspect to that offense that might make things interesting. Again, big picture, the thing the Patriots have to address is their wide receiver core. Do they stay healthy? Do they have enough receivers? That's going to be the age-old problem, regardless of who's quarterbacking the team in 2020.
Because that's part of the reason right there that the New England Patriots didn't go as far as they were expected to do so last year, is because of the fact they just didn't have enough offensively to surround Tom Brady. And, to me, it just looks like at this point, I don't think they've fully solved the problem, but I'm hoping that for New England's Patriots fans out there, and I know there are many out there that love the Patriots, that at least for them, they'll get a team that's going to have enough diversions at both the running back and the wide receiver position. I'm just never know, because Tom Brady was able to go ahead and, I don't know, let's say up the level of the surrounding offense just by his play. I don't know if Cam Newton can do that. I'm hoping a fresh Cam Newton can do that if he comes in there, at least to go ahead and show off to people that he should have been picked up right away for free agency. This is something you and I, like I said, we're just mystified why Cam Newton was still out there. I still am just mystified why he was not picked up sooner. And I'm rooting for him, not necessarily for the Patriots, because I'm not a Patriots fan per se, but I don't, bash or hate the Patriots. I'm kind of indifferent when it comes to them. But when it comes to Cam Newton, I'm a fan of his. I appreciate what he's done for the league. And I think for him, I would like to see a success story going forward for him, because I think he deserves it.
I agree. My son Dom, who you mentioned earlier, we have the Domination Sports Nation podcast. He's a big Cam Newton fan. I personally have had him in fantasy a few times, and one year he paid off for me. Last year when I took him in the later rounds, he was a bust. But all in all, I think he's an exciting player to watch, even from a fantasy perspective. I think in previous years he was good to his owners. So from that perspective, I'd like to see him do well. I think, and we outlined this at the time, he was purely a victim of the pandemic. I just think teams were so locked down at that point in the spring that they couldn't get in front of him to look at him. I mean, the rumor was the Dolphins had to kind of sneak a doctor in to just look at Tua Tagovailoa coming off a major surgery, and he was a 21-year-old college player. So I think all in all, it's going to work out for the Patriots. I think because the dollar amount is not substantial, and I think there's more upside than anything. Now, do I think they're a Super Bowl contender? No, but again, they play in the AFC East, and at the end of the day, would you rather have a healthy Cam Newton if that's the case, or a third-year Josh Allen with a lot of question marks?
That's true, or Jared Stidham for that matter. But I want to ask you this, my friend, before we go ahead and delve into the doghouse before we head on out, and that is for fantasy owners. I know he's going to rise quickly. Obviously, he won't be picked in the 20th round, which I think was what he was in our league, by none other than, I think it was Jason Dutch himself picked him, because he was still a free agent at that point in time. I think he's obviously going to rise up draft boards. Is he going to rise up too quick, or is he going to rise up beyond what his level of expectation should be? I think so. I think he's going to be moved up to possibly even like a 5th, a 6th, a 7th rounder. And for that, I'm saying, whoa. I think right now he's a good QB2 option. He's not a great QB2 option, I think, at this point until I see more from his receivers, more from his running backs, and also his health as well. So I'd say he's a pretty good QB2. I wouldn't start him yet as a QB1 if you're in a 10 or 12 team league yet. I would see what you're going to get from him first as far as his health and his numbers and how he fits in that offense before you go ahead and bump him in that slot. So I think you should worry about that, and when you draft him, and draft him accordingly. Don't go reaching too high on Cam Newton at this point in time.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's exactly what I thought. And we'll talk about this in future episodes. Every fantasy team nowadays needs a quality backup quarterback just because of the injury effect. Now heading into a COVID NFL world, I would argue you've got to have two quality quarterbacks, because what if your starter, never mind, gets hurt? What if he gets infected and is quarantined for 14 days? And I think Cam Newton can be a good option. I think, too, you've got a solid number one quarterback. Maybe you didn't reach on him or take him too high. Not necessarily a middle of the pack guy, but I had Kyler Murray this year. I think a lot of people are going to like. Last year I had him. I think a lot of people are going to like him this year. So I don't know if you get him, but let's say you have someone like I don't know, just throw some names out there, like a Kirk Cousins or an Aaron Rodgers, who will put up numbers but aren't elite. I think Cam Newton's a good alternative as a backup because, too, he's got upside. If he does start and he's healthy and he gets in the groove and the Patriots go on a run, you never know. You may be able to plug him in or use him as trade bait at some point during the season. So I agree with that approach. Definitely not a first-round pick. And I think, too, if we don't have a preseason or a shortened preseason and he's not going to get reps, or beat writers aren't going to have how he is physically to report back to the rest of us waiting so anxiously, there's still that X factor of, is he in game shape?
And that's the thing. So I would say right now, and you can let us know at isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com, or as well Inside Sports FF, right there on Twitter. If you want to go ahead and just let us know your thoughts on Cam Newton, go ahead and do so, or at Chris L Sports, or me at Pop Culture Cosmo on Twitter, about what your feeling is on Cam Newton. I still think right now, conservatively, and I'm thinking it's conservatively, I think right now 15 to 20. I would put him in that 15 to 20 range, closer to around 18 or 19 as far as quarterback is concerned. I would not start thinking about him until about the 9th or 10th round as far as quarterbacks are concerned. That's just me. It's just what I'm thinking. I don't know. How about you, my friend?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking some point of the lower teens kind of came to mind. I don't know why, like a 17, 18, when I initially thought about it and sat down and looked at the quarterbacks in front of him. I think that's a fair assessment now. People now, if they're drafting, and I don't know why you would, but that's a side note, may tend to inflate his draft value. But I think as we go on, and even let's say that training camp does start in August, like they're planning on it, I think as the reality sets in, you'll see, hey, he's a compelling story, but I don't think he's worth taking a risk on it at certain points in the draft. So I think that's definitely safe to say. Now, you compare him to someone like a Ben Roethlisberger, yeah, I think he's better than him. He's definitely got more upside. He's physically, even coming off of surgeries, in better shape, and I think the offense will be tailored for him there. But that's not the greatest comparison, but there are worse quarterbacks you could get as a number 2 to have in fantasy football.
But just you wait, my friend. Once you start getting into drafts, and once I start getting into regular non-dynasty drafts and all that, that don't take 2 weeks, once I get into more normalized drafts, I think you and I both are going to be seeing Cam Newton being reached upon and taking it a lot higher. Now, I'm hoping I'm wrong. I hope he does produce at a level that's commensurate to what he was, at or near his peak. I'm really rooting for the guy. But I'm telling you right now, I think a lot of people are going to go ahead and start reaching for him. So if he falls to you right around the 9th or 10th round, then you can start looking out for him. Then you can start going ahead and say, you know what, he may be an option, because I know Chris, when he drafts, and I know when I draft, we like to go ahead and get two quality quarterbacks right near each other. Maybe it's like 6th to 9th rounds or 7th to 10th or, whatnot, however it falls in the draft. I don't like to go ahead and leave myself hanging on a QB2. So you can start looking for him there as my best suggestion, but I have a feeling he's going to start being reached higher upon when you and I or anyone else goes out there in their drafts.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in that case, just let the veterans that can put up numbers for you and slide into your QB1 spot if there's injury or anything else wrong with your first drafted quarterback. Let the value play. I mean, I'm thinking too, someone like a Matt Stafford comes to mind, Gerald. Do you think that's someone who was so beaten up last year and people are so down on that perhaps he ends up becoming a QB2 in some leagues? If so, maybe if he falls to you, I think I'd rather have him than the Cam Newton. Not that I think he's essentially a light-out fantasy quarterback at his age, given his injuries, but that's not a bad problem to have when Stafford's your number 2. Even though it is the Lions, I mean, the guy has put up numbers in the past. So, moral of the story, I agree. Don't reach for Cam. Let him come to you.
Stafford's going to be picked higher. I think Stafford is still thought of as a more sure bet from what I'm seeing on all the draft scenarios, the draft analysts out there. People are still high on Matt Stafford. I mean, when the kid's healthy, the kid can throw. Same thing with Cam. When Cam's ready to play, and if he's healthy, they're both going to be able to produce at a pretty good clip. The thing is, can you keep them on the field? And if you can't, that's part of the problem because they both have that injury history right there. So you might be inclined to say, you know what, I might not be willing to take that risk and may go with someone safer that doesn't look like on the surface that they would be able to produce as good a numbers, but at least I know that as an option as a backup quarterback or even a late end QB1 are going to be able to go ahead and be on the field because they have the track record to prove it.
Yeah, I agree, and I get it. My thinking is that Stafford's burned so many people over the last few years that maybe they're just going to stay away. He's radioactive, as it were, or even someone who's not hurt as much, but people are down on. What do you think about like a Matt Ryan, especially with him and his coach being on the hot seat this year? Maybe he's got something to prove. I don't know. I'm just throwing names out there because I'm grasping for straws to talk about anything fantasy or NFL related. But that's another name that sticks out to me. And like you said, you've got to have that number 2 quarterback. You can't take a flyer on someone. You can't think because, I've got Drew Brees, for instance, even at his advanced age or whatever the case is, I can wait till the 13th round to pick a quarterback. No, you don't want to do that. If Cam's available there, God love you. That's great. The teams in your league really screwed up their drafts. You're not going to with yours, but it's so important, and we'll continue to talk about this throughout the off season as long as it ends up being.
That Super Bowl love is gone, my friend. If Matt Ryan does not produce, I think he can get yanked. I think he can actually get taken out, and which is a shame because of the fact he's not that far removed from a Super Bowl performance. But I'm going to tell you right now, the memory and the history for a lot of these players is very short, and if they don't produce at a high level continuously, they're out. They're on the bench. They're out, period. I mean, it just seems like that's the case almost every single time. So Matt Ryan is – I'm going to put Matt Ryan, Matt Stafford, and Cam Newton as high-risk, high-reward players, which, be wary, draft at your own peril, that type of deal, because they can win you a league, but they can also get you right out of one.
Completely agree. Those are the guys you take a flyer on later on when you're like, oh, he's still there. What the heck? Do not make that the formation of I've got a conviction and I'm taking him in a single-digit round. Don't do it.
So, my friend, that's been great conversation so far. I truly appreciate it. It's great to get back in the saddle right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football. But before we head on out, I think I think it's time to go ahead and throw a bone over to you, my friend, because it's time to go ahead and woof, 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 step right in to the doghouse.
It's been a while. The dog's been lazy this summer so far, but it's good to come out of the house and bask in the sun for a little bit. Kind of hit on this earlier. We all are fantasy football players. This time of year, the magazines like to show up on the shelves with their rankings and predictions and whatnot. Remember, these things are written months in advance and are not necessarily accurate. But especially this year, I want you to try, and as hard as it is, because there's not a heck of a lot to read about or focus on right now during these quiet times in professional sports. Um, do not sign up for a draft, even if you think your draft might be in August. I would more closely follow what's going on in the NFL, see what cues they give you about training camp. And me personally, I like drafting as close to the regular season as possible. Who knows if that's even going to happen August, September this year? It remains to be seen. But in the interim, you want to sign up for some mock drafts or practice drafts online. By all means, do it. But I don't think they're going to have as much validity at this point in time heading into July 2020 as they would in previous years. Maybe read up on teams, see what's being reported. It's also hard, too, because a lot of these guys didn't have OTAs. Unless you're Tom Brady going to practice in a park with his new buddies on the Buccaneers. Hard to gauge who's doing what or how players look right now, especially rookies. So basically, pump your brakes, be patient, just continue to read up on teams as much as you can. I know this is a quiet period anyway, but don't do that draft yet. Just be patient, my friends.
I wish you would have told that to my group sooner. In fact, more than 2 weeks ago sooner. But I'll tell you what, like I said, it's a good group. And also check out our good friends at the Jock and Nerd podcast. They're a great group. And, I know that it's going to be a fun league, but you're right. I think normally I do take that advice when it comes to drafting at the last second. I usually do it for the baseball and basketball leagues and NFL leagues. They usually do it right near, less than a couple days left, 2, 3, 4 days left before the start of the season. I think that's probably the best advice, especially with what's going on in coronavirus, because anything can happen and the season can be stopped and canceled without really any advance notice.
Yeah, it's truly uncharted territory. And in your defense, 2 weeks ago, none of us really saw this next wave of outbreaks coming. I mean, I know some states opened earlier than others, but there really wasn't a heck of a lot of data pointing to that at various points through the news cycle. It was the second story on the news, not the top story on the news, but that all changed on a dime.
Yes, it did, my friend. Yes, it did. But I'll tell you what, it's just great talking to you. Once again, it's Chris Lardieri from Inside Sports. You got to check out what he's doing today at Chris L Sports on Twitter. Plus, check out his awesome podcast. What is that podcast again?
Domination Sports Nation. And if you put it all into one word, you can follow us on Instagram as well. And available on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, Google, all the fine podcast hosts out there.
Domination Sports Nation out there. It's a great podcast, and you got to go ahead and download it today. Just like we thank you so much for listening here, I'm sure Chris and his son obviously thanks you very much for listening in advance for his Domination Sports Nation podcast.
Absolutely.
Well, my friend, it's been a great episode. Great catching up with you again. I'm just thankful I'm finally finished with that dynasty draft that seemingly took forever. But you know what? It's just great that right now that Cam Newton, we actually know what's going to happen in his future, at least hopefully if he does have an NFL future, who knows with the coronavirus, but at least we know now that his next year will be with the New England Patriots. Looking forward to some good news there for him. And in the coming weeks, we'll keep on continuing previewing the league as more news and more information comes up on the NFL. And I'll tell you what, it's just great for everybody listening. Any last thoughts on the way out, my friend?
Oh, now that the Cam mystery's been solved, I think here let's just keep our fingers crossed. Hope we can move forward with training camp and have some actual football to digest. In the meantime, I guess we'll take the fingers on our left hand or right hand, depending on what you write with. Cross those for MLB, NBA, and NHL to get started. hoping here in a few weeks we'll have some actual sports to kind of keep our minds occupied and entertained.
That would be nice, my friend. That would be nice. I'll tell you what, it's been great talking to you. Once again, it's Chris Lardieri from Inside Sports. Catch what he's doing today at Chris L Sports on Twitter. We're available anytime at Inside Sports on Inside Sports Fantasy Football on Facebook, Inside Sports on Facebook. You can also catch us at Pop Culture Cosmo on Twitter, isfantasyfootball@yahoo.com, or at Inside Sports FF on Twitter as well. All that you can get a hold of us for advice, for questions, for just NFL talk. You can go ahead and do it right there. We appreciate it if you did. And again, please give us that 5-star review, like, subscribe, whatever you can do to follow our podcast. We truly appreciate it. And I'll tell you what, Chris, it's great to finally see a destination and a home for Cam Newton. I'm looking forward to what he can do out on the field, if we actually can see what he's doing out of the field, if the NFL season does get underway. But I'm looking forward to it and seeing how he fits for fantasy football owners out there as we move forward right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football.